The chamber of the Galactic Council shimmered with the glow of 1,000 different bioluminescent species, their combined presence creating an eerie, shifting light. Towering crystalline beings pulsed with rhythmic flashes, amphibious diplomats exhaled mist through gill slits, and cybernetic organisms flickered with internal computations. They had gathered for a singular purpose, to decide the fate of the newest species to reach the stars. The humans. Seated at the highest podium was High Arbiter Zelther of the Vorlon Dominion, his segmented carapace gleaming under the chamber's artificial glow. His kind had conquered a dozen worlds and assimilated or eradicated weaker species without resistance. In his eyes, humans were no different. Primitive. Emotional. Predictable. He clicked his mandibles once and addressed the assembly. Humanity is an aberration. They are ruled by instinct, driven by irrational emotions. They lack the refinement of the Zalari, the discipline of the Othvon, or the collective intelligence of the hive mind ascendant. What they possess instead, he paused, is chaos. A murmur spread through the gathered representatives. The Zalari, a tall and ethereal species with translucent skin, shifted uneasily. Counselor Vara, their designated speaker, inclined her head. And yet, they have spread faster than expected. Their homeworld is but a single planet, yet their reach extends across multiple systems in mere centuries. That is unprecedented. Unacceptable, Zelther corrected. Their growth is dangerous. Their wars among themselves are frequent, yet they rise stronger after each one. No other species escalates conflict as they do. They do not fight for mere survival, they fight to conquer. His compound eyes scanned the council. We must act now, before they become a threat. Across the chamber, a deep rumbling voice cut through the tension. You fear them. The speaker was Grand Minister Jorakan of the Othvon Imperium, a species renowned for their warlike honor. His massive frame, encased in ceremonial armor, remained still, but his 4 eyes locked onto Zelther with quiet amusement. I have observed these humans closely. I have read their histories, their ancient philosophies. They are unique, yes, but fearsome. He let the question hang. Perhaps you fear what you do not understand. Zelther's mandibles twitched, the Vorlon equivalent of a sneer. I understand enough. You wish to test them? Fine. But know this, the Vorlon Dominion does not tolerate threats. I propose we do what we have always done with lesser species, subjugate them. They will submit, or they will burn. A silence fell over the chamber. Subjugation was a common fate for weaker civilizations, absorbed into the greater galactic order. Many nodded in agreement. Others, however, hesitated. Vara's voice was cautious. And if they resist? Zelther leaned forward. They will not. The vote was cast. The decision was made. The fleet would depart at once. The Vorlon fleet arrived at Earth in perfect formation, a vast, impenetrable wall of warships blotting out the stars. Their flagship, the Dominator, opened a transmission. The message, projected in hundreds of human languages, was simple. Kneel or be erased. On Earth, the United Planetary Coalition, humanity's fragile attempt at unity, held an emergency session. World leaders, military strategists, and scientific minds debated furiously, but there was no time. The Vorlon had given them mere hours to surrender. General Adrian Carter stood in the war room, arms folded. He had seen war, real war, the kind that left craters where cities once stood. He had studied every major conflict in human history, and he knew one thing: surrender was not an option. He exhaled slowly, keeping his voice even. They think they can intimidate us. They think fear will break us. His eyes met those around him. They don't understand who we are. President Elaine Monroe, her face drawn but resolute, nodded. Then let's teach them. The response was sent. A message that would be recorded in history books across the galaxy. No. Zelther watched the human defiance with cold amusement. It was predictable. Pathetic. He turned to his second-in-command. Begin planetary bombardment. Target their capital cities. The Vorlon weapons charged, glowing with the sickly light of annihilation. The first shot fired, a lance of energy streaking through the void, aimed at Earth's largest city. A warning. A display of power. It never landed. Somewhere in the vastness of space, a human-launched missile intercepted the blast mid-air, detonating it before it reached the atmosphere. Zelther's amusement flickered. A coincidence? Then the counterattack began. Missiles launched from Earth's surface, faster than any predicted models. Some were intercepted, but others struck true, ripping into Vorlon hulls. Fighters, built not for elegance but for sheer brutal efficiency, swarmed the larger ships. The Vorlon, expecting easy submission, found themselves facing something terrifying. Resistance. Zelther's claws tightened around the command console. He opened another transmission, this time directly to the human leaders. "You are delaying the inevitable. You cannot win." The response came, broadcast across all frequencies. A human soldier stood in view, battle-scarred and bloodied, his eyes burning with something alien to the Vorlon. Not fear. Not desperation. Rage. "You shouldn't have done that." The transmission cut. And then, humanity fought back. The Vorlon had expected swift capitulation. What they encountered instead was defiance so absolute, so unrelenting, that their calculated projections crumbled within the first hours of battle. The humans should have been afraid. Their planet should have surrendered. Instead, they retaliated with a fury that defied all logic. The first wave of orbital bombardments never reached the surface. Humanity had learned long ago that war was inevitable, and they had prepared. Shielded bunkers, hidden launch sites, and automated defense grids sprang to life in the face of extinction. Anti-orbital railguns, crude but devastatingly effective, tore through Vorlon hulls like a butcher's cleaver through bone. The initial losses were inconceivable. Zelther paced the bridge of the Dominator, his mandibles clicking in controlled frustration. "How is this possible?" he demanded. His lieutenant, Voker, hesitated before responding. "They adapt too quickly, High Arbiter. Their tactics shift mid-battle. We calculate their responses, but by the time our algorithms adjust, they have already changed." Zelther narrowed his compound eyes. Adaptation was not unique to humans, but this was something else. Their fleet was inferior, their technology decades behind, and yet their pilots fought like cornered beasts, their soldiers attacked with the precision of a hive mind, and their commanders made decisions no artificial intelligence could predict. They fought as though they had nothing to lose. He turned toward the central display, where battle reports streamed in chaotic waves. Across the planet's surface, human ground forces were engaging Vorlon shock troops. They fought with whatever they had, conventional firearms, jury-rigged explosives, even their own bodies when necessary. They ignored their own wounds, pressing forward even when victory seemed impossible. On the war-torn outskirts of New London, a Vorlon officer recorded a final transmission before his unit was overrun. His voice trembled as he spoke. "They do not retreat." General Adrian Carter stood atop the remains of a Vorlon dropship, scanning the battlefield through the thick haze of smoke and dust. His armor was battered, streaked with dirt and blood that wasn't entirely his own. The Vorlon had underestimated them. That mistake had cost them dearly. A voice crackled over his earpiece. "General, enemy reinforcements incoming." He turned his gaze to the horizon. More Vorlon troops, marching in rigid, mechanical formations. They were stronger, faster, but predictable. That was their weakness. Carter's grip tightened on his rifle. Let them come. The battle raged on. Cities became war zones. Skies once filled with stars now burned with the wreckage of fallen ships. The Vorlon had arrived as conquerors, but they were beginning to understand their miscalculation. The humans did not fight for survival alone. They fought for vengeance. In the ruins of Berlin, a lone Vorlon scout transmitted a report to his command ship. "They are relentless," he said, his voice edged with something his species was not supposed to feel. "We strike them down, and they rise again. It is not strategy that drives them. It is something else." Zelther reviewed the report in silence. His species had faced countless adversaries, but none like this. None who fought harder when the odds turned against them. None who turned pain into fury. He had believed their emotions to be a weakness. Now he saw the truth. Emotion was their greatest weapon. The war should have been over in days. It stretched into weeks. And then, the unthinkable happened. The humans boarded a Vorlon dreadnought. It should have been impossible. The Dominion's capital ships were technological masterpieces, their defenses impenetrable. And yet, a team of human operatives, armed with nothing but stolen schematics and sheer audacity, breached the hull of the Vindicator. They moved like specters through the corridors, eliminating resistance with brutal efficiency. The ship's automated defenses failed, hacked by human ingenuity. Its security forces fell, overwhelmed by human ferocity. By the time the Vorlon fleet realized what had happened, the Vindicator was no longer theirs. A transmission echoed across every Vorlon channel. The screen flickered to life, revealing a human soldier standing on the bridge of the captured vessel. His face was battered, his uniform torn, but his eyes burned with something undeniable. Rage. His voice was calm, deliberate. "You wanted to see what happens when humans get angry?" The screen cut to black. Then the Vorlon dreadnought turned its weapons against its own fleet. The Vindicator opened fire. The dreadnought's weapons, once a symbol of Vorlon supremacy, now burned against their own kind. Lances of superheated plasma carved through warships that had stood undefeated for centuries. Entire formations crumbled under the onslaught, their precision unraveling into chaos. The Vorlon, creatures of strategy and calculated warfare, faltered in the face of something beyond their comprehension. Their own tactics had been turned against them. From the bridge of the captured dreadnought, Captain Elias Mercer stood unmoving, his gaze locked onto the unfolding destruction. The weight of the moment pressed against him, but there was no hesitation in his stance. The Vorlon had given humanity no mercy. They would receive none in return. "All batteries, fire at will," he ordered. The ship obeyed. Across the war-torn void, General Carter watched from the command deck of Earth's flagship, the Indomitable. They had done it. They had shattered the illusion of Vorlon invincibility. But this was only the beginning. The enemy still outnumbered them, still commanded the bulk of the fleet. Victory was not yet in their grasp, but the tide had turned. "Sir," an officer called, "the Vorlon fleet is retreating." Carter exhaled slowly. "No, not retreating. Regrouping." Zelther was not the kind to flee. He would not accept defeat. "Not yet. Prepare the jump drives," Carter said. "We take the fight to them." In all recorded galactic history, no species had dared to strike at the Vorlon homeworld. No empire had ever tested their defenses, for to do so was to court annihilation. But the Vorlon had never faced an enemy like humanity. They had mistaken the fire of human rage for a fleeting ember. Instead, they had ignited an inferno. The fleet jumped. The Vorlon home system was a fortress. Planetary shields wreathed their world in an unbreakable barrier, and defensive platforms stood ready to obliterate any force foolish enough to approach. Dozens of dreadnoughts encircled the capital, a final, immovable line of defense. Zelther stood at the heart of it, his mandibles tight with suppressed fury. His species did not experience emotion as humans did, but they understood failure. And failure was unacceptable. "They come," Volker said. Zelther watched the human fleet emerge from the void, battered but unbroken. They had no right to be here. No right to have survived this long. And yet, here they were. He activated the planetary defenses. The shields flared to life. This battle would be their end. The humans disagreed. The Vindicator, still under Mercer's command, led the charge. It tore through Vorlon ranks like a vengeful specter, its stolen codes granting it access past the first wave of defenses. The Indomitable followed, flanked by Earth's finest warships, each one scarred but unyielding. They pushed forward, weaving through the storm of enemy fire with reckless determination. On the planet below, the streets of the Vorlon capital trembled with unease. For the first time in their long history, they felt the creeping edges of fear. The enemy was at their gates. The unthinkable had become reality. Carter's voice carried across all channels, his words not just for his soldiers, but for the entire galaxy. "You thought we were weak. You thought we would kneel." A pause. "Now you learn what happens when humanity stands." The Vorlon fought with the desperation of those who had never known loss. But desperation was not enough. The battle turned, not through superior numbers, nor through strategy, but through sheer, relentless will. Humanity refused to break. Zelther knew then that they had already lost. The planetary shields failed. The humans landed. What followed was not a battle. It was retribution. By nightfall, the Vorlon capital burned. Their armies fell. Their leaders were dragged from their palaces, the weight of their arrogance crashing down upon them. Zelther himself, once the architect of conquest, stood before General Carter, bound in the ruins of his own throne room. Carter met his gaze without triumph, only certainty. "It didn't have to be this way," he said. Zelther clicked his mandibles once, the Vorlon equivalent of a bitter smile. "We underestimated you." Carter exhaled. "Yes." With a single, final command, the war ended. Days later, the Galactic Council convened once more. But this time, it was not the Vorlon who presided over it. The chamber was silent as a human stepped forward. His uniform bore the marks of war, his presence commanding. The councillors, once so certain of their dominion, waited. The human spoke. "We did not ask for this war. But we finished it. If you want peace, respect us. If you want war—" He let the words linger. They already knew the answer.